presidential election moving ahead in the key remaining states, waiting to find out whether he'll address the nation.
The wait continues to see if Joe Biden can claim a decisive win in Pennsylvania as Georgia heads for a recount.
Donald Trump insists the election is not over yet and says Joe Biden should not wrongfully claim the presidency.
And back home, Victoria marks 8 days of no new coronavirus cases or deaths.
Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the US election. I'm Miriam Corowa.
And I'm Joe O'Brien. So everything is kind of coming to a head. This 4-day saga that is the US election count appears to be close to a resolution, but we've been saying that for a while and we've been proved wrong. But yeah, it does feel like we're getting towards an initial resolution in terms of some kind of result, with the waiting for the US networks to call it in for either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But overnight, Joe Biden jumped to the lead in the states of Pennsylvania and Georgia. The overwhelming signs are it will be a Democrat White House for the next 4 years, but it's not quite over yet.
No, that's right. Joe Biden was set to speak in Delaware shortly. There's now speculation that that might not be happening, but we will stay across that throughout the day. Let's now go to US Bureau Chief David Lipson, who's at the Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington. David, what signals are we getting so far from the Trump and Biden camps?
Well, I have just moved, sorry for not letting you know, but we're at outside Capitol Hill now, obviously. But look, we are getting very, very different signals from both camps now, starting with the White House. The president is still spending some time in the Oval Office, we're told today, but we understand a sort of air of despondency is starting to fall over his staff. Many of them didn't show up to work apparently today. The ones that did spent a good chunk of the day on their phones outside the building, wandering around on the lawns and the like. The president, though, continues to fight. He is still pushing on with his claims of untoward things happening at ballot boxes, fraud and the like, without presenting the evidence still. And seemingly complaining in some of the tweets that he has put out. One of them reads, "I had such a big lead in all these states late into election night, only to see the leads miraculously disappear as the days went by." Well, it wasn't miraculous, of course. This is what we knew would happen as the postal votes came in that we knew would strongly favour Joe Biden. Another tweet, he said, "Joe Biden should not wrongfully claim the office of the president. I could make that claim also. Legal proceedings are just now beginning." Now, putting aside that Donald Trump has in fact already made that claim twice, a false claim of victory, he's not really wrong that Joe Biden should not claim victory before it has been confirmed. And perhaps that's why this delay as to a national address that we were told about by Joe Biden tonight in Delaware at Wilmington, the convention centre there, where we've seen photos of confetti machines set up. So it looks like they are prepared for a party. Now, Joe Biden would have to be a little bit careful about the image that would present, because he's put himself forward as a healer and someone that would bring the divisions closer together again. At the same time, he wants to present a very clear image that he is the winner, to put to bed all of these claims of challenges and fraudulent elections and the like. So we will see where things go, but the lead for Joe Biden in those key states, certainly Pennsylvania has blown out to 20,000 now. He's increasing his lead in Georgia and also in Nevada. Arizona, the gap is narrowing still. So whether or not that will fall back into Donald Trump's column, it won't matter if Joe Biden continues to increase his lead in Pennsylvania with the 20 electoral votes there.
And so, David, so what are you hearing about this Biden statement? Has there officially been something? Have you seen something officially saying that it is now delayed for a period? What's happening with it?
No, we haven't seen anything official, and we're not getting any information of great note out of the Biden camp. everything's set up, everything's ready to go, and indeed, our cameras are waiting there ready for this speech. It was put out about 6 hours ago, I think now, that there was going to be this national address. It's prime time here in the United States, although it is Friday night. So all of the pins were set up. They just haven't been knocked down just yet. So it makes sense, though, that Joe Biden would not make a victory speech before anyone has actually handed him the victory in terms of the big networks. So he would just be waiting. Perhaps he still will face the cameras, but I highly doubt that he will claim victory as the president-elect until it has been officially projected by one or perhaps two of the major networks here in the United States.
Well, David, as the wait continues there, what about reaction on the streets? As you say, it's Friday night there. Has there been any sign of any disturbance or violence anywhere?
Look, nothing significant. There have been a few perhaps alarming scenes in Arizona, particularly where there's quite a large group of protesters, many of them armed. It's an open carry state, so there's nothing illegal about that. They're allowed to wander around with guns slung over their shoulders, and that's what they're doing. It's a little bit more edgy, I suppose, when there's a whole crowd of people doing that and shouting and screaming, but no violence. It's just on edge. Elsewhere, we have seen pretty much a party scene. We saw a lot of that earlier today in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, with basically a street party going on the streets. And we saw smaller signs of that here on the streets of Washington, D.C. as well, with a large, a reasonable sized rally, a few hundred people marching through the streets with signs with Joe Biden cutouts and a giant blimp-sized blow-up doll, if you like, of Donald Trump. So they are ready, certainly in this town, which is very, very heavily Democrat, for Donald Trump to be turfed out of the White House. But it hasn't officially happened yet.
Now, while all eyes, of course, are focusing on the presidential election, the US has in fact smashed another record for daily coronavirus cases.
Yeah, this is getting really worrying. I mean, it's been worrying all year, but today a new record broken: 122,000 odd new cases of coronavirus detected here in this day alone. And remember, the rate of testing here is much lower than it is in a country like Australia. So there's probably many more cases happening undetected. And also, on top of that, the death rate now starting to climb. 1,100 deaths today alone. So you're starting to see a very clear trajectory going upwards. And of course, this is all before, these would all be cases that would have happened before election day, where, yes, there was social distancing happening at all the ballot boxes, but still there may have been transmission that happened there. Of course, in the week or two before that, Donald Trump was racing around the battleground states holding huge rallies, and some of them had been linked to surges in cases. But since then, of course, these street parties that are going on, these protests that are going on, a lot of people gathering, shouting, coming together. So the only way appears to be up for the number of coronavirus cases as the temperature drops as we head into winter. So that must be alarming health authorities here. It's not getting much of a mention in the news here either, but it will bite, and it already is biting, and a lot of people are getting sick.
And David, last time I looked, the death toll was around 230,000. Is it much more than that now?
I haven't checked in the last day or two. Had a few other things on our minds, but yeah, look, it is up around that number. It's just staggering, a staggering number of lives lost in this country. And to me, as an Australian, I must say it's been staggering to me how the divide on who sort of seems to be concerned about it, and how it has become such a big political issue. Yes, there are many Americans who are deeply concerned about it, take all the proper precautions, but as you travel around the country, particularly to Republican states and Republican regions, there is just so little care about it. People either think it's just part of life, or they think it's a hoax, or they just couldn't really be bothered, or they're just more concerned about their jobs and the economy. So a very different attitude in some parts of this country.
Yeah, and in fact, I think I saw some commentators suggesting that because COVID-19 had been caused such terrible loss in Arizona, that it was possibly a factor there. What have you heard about the COVID-19 politics playing into the election result?
Yeah, it's really hard to sort of nail that down. I mean, there is one theory floating around that perhaps part of the reason Joe Biden, snatched back those blue wall states in the Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, and perhaps Pennsylvania, is because right at the tail end of the campaign, COVID cases and deaths were starting to spike. So that is a theory going around that may have had an impact. But there's no real clear evidence that nails that down because in other parts of the country, like Florida, which also had a spike and a whole lot of deaths over the summer, Donald Trump won Florida, and he continued to hold rallies. And in fact, at his rallies, he mocked the precautions that have been put in place to protect people from COVID-19. When the governor, Ron DeSantis, got up on stage at a rally that I was at a few days before the election, people cheered him wildly because he had opened up the state. He had ended the lockdown and fought hard. So, there are really different attitudes as you move around the country. And linking those attitudes to votes is a pretty difficult exercise. I'm sure some research body or university may be able to do that, but at this stage I haven't seen any definitive evidence linking the two.
All right, David Lipson, we'll leave it there for now. Of course, we'll be keeping an eye across whether or not Joe Biden does step up to speak. Our North America Bureau Chief, David Lipson, there in Washington. Now, we're also joined at the desk by International Affairs analyst Stan Grant. So, Stan, we've been painting a fairly stark picture just in terms of how the pandemic has played into the backdrop behind the election. Of course, the focus has been on those votes trickling in, but we're seeing a divided nation in the United States on so many levels there.
Yeah, and just listening to what David had to say there, it reveals once again the impossibility of trying to apply one particular analytical lens to a country that is as complex and large and divided as America. Just take COVID, for instance. Yes, the numbers are high. Yes, there's been more than 200,000 people dead, but there's also over 300 million people in the country. There are people who will say we need to live with it. There are people who will cheer the reopening of the economy, and then there are other people who are going to sort of shy away from that. We know the most affected communities in America by COVID have been the most vulnerable communities, black communities, poor communities. And yet, in the poor communities, you've still seen a big swing, to Donald Trump. So it is impossible to apply just that one lens to the country and say that is a snapshot of America. Even when you look at things like Black Lives Matter or violence, and we talk about, white supremacy. That doesn't apply right across America either. You go to the United States, you go to New York or LA or Washington or Chicago and you see one America. And then, you drive into the hinterland and you see another America. It is such a complex and complicated country. It is such a divided country. And if you look at the vote, even within states, we say red states and blue states, but Casey's been pointing out, even within those states, there are red and blue divides within them. So just impossible to look at a country like America and say, this is America, this is a snapshot of America, this is what Americans are concerned about, or this is what they will vote on. That's probably been one of the problems with the polling. Trying to get a lens that tries to say this is what America thinks has proved to be impossible.
And Stan, interesting to hear from David Lipson there that there are reports there are confetti machines at this Biden event. So sounds like they were planning that this actually could be a celebration, but still. And
right that they hold off, Joe, isn't it?
Yeah.
They hold off because right now, once it's declared, you are immediately, I think, going to see an increase in tension. Inevitably, there are people who are going to be on the streets and protesting. And that's when you look to Donald Trump and say, OK, we've heard from him thus far. At that point, you would hope that you would get something that was much more presidential and worthy of the office, and worthy too of the people who voted for him in good faith, to say to them, let's respect this, and now let's hold them to account, and let's work for better outcomes for the people that I've sought to lead. But that's never been Donald Trump. So holding off is a good thing. Let's wait and see how the count goes. We know that there is going to be recounts. I think Georgia already, right? If Pennsylvania is close, there may be recounts there. The networks, who ordinarily may be really quick to press the button here and say, yes, we're calling this, have also shown restraint. And I think that's in deference to some of the heat that's around, the fact that this is so divided, and the fact that the language we've heard from Donald Trump can be incendiary. And so we need to make sure that everything is calm, that everything is beyond reproach, and we can try to have an orderly and credible end to what has been a really strongly and tightly fought election.
It will be incredibly interesting to see how these next few hours, hopefully not days, but possibly days, with the vote continuing. Stan Grant, we're going to cross now and have a chat about those numbers, because as you pointed out there, even within states, we're seeing a divide between people who've been voting Republican and Democrat. So everything is pointing at this stage, though, to a Joe Biden victory. It's still not a done deal. Let's now check in with the man who's been keeping count for about 100 hours or so straight. You're keeping account of your hours as well, Casey Briggs.
I'll do my timesheet later and file it with the ABC.
No overtime
for now, we're doing all right.
All right, let's start with Pennsylvania, Casey.
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, Joe Biden, let's not confuse the two. Joe Biden and the Democrats, I think, were pretty hopeful that we would see a result declared by the major networks today in Pennsylvania. That's what we're seeing in Delaware. We've seen the House leader, Nancy Pelosi, today even referring to Joe Biden as the president-elect. Pennsylvania is a state that we still think is favoured by quite a measure to go toward Joe Biden. It's shifted just a little bit in the last hour, and now Joe Biden is just shy of 20,000 votes ahead. At the start of the day, this was about a 0.1% margin, and it's now blowing out to a 0.3% margin. So that has just been slowly increasing. What we don't know is the sort of frequency of updates from Pennsylvania. They're just sort of counting and updating when the numbers come through, and so it's a little bit hard to predict exactly when. It's also a little bit hard for us to know exactly how many votes are left, and particularly what kinds of types. We know there are almost 30,000 votes in this county. That's where Pittsburgh is, that'll yet to be counted. We know there are some votes in the Philadelphia area, and just also in the last hour there's been a Supreme Court decision which basically just reaffirms what the state was already doing with ballots that had been sent before Election Day but arrived afterwards, and they're being segregated and counted separately and kept separate. So there's just a bit of complications with court cases and things that are slowly delaying things without going into the full detail of those. If that margin continues to grow, if the provisional ballots continue to break in Joe Biden's favour, you would expect the major networks to be calling Pennsylvania. But yes, as we've been saying, there's a lot of caution. I might just quickly jump to some of the other states and just quickly kind of lay out what we can expect in the next little while. First of all, the ones that we've sort of put a pin in for days, North Carolina, don't expect anything there before next week, because really that's just coming down to postal votes. Georgia, while there is still some counting going on, the lead there for Joe Biden is about 4,000 votes now. I think we just need to put a pin in it. I'm calling that this will not be resolved today. That is a call that I'm prepared to make. These 16 electoral votes probably not being...
And that's actually come back a bit for Trump in the last hour.
Has it really? I haven't noticed.
Yeah, it's like he's 1,000 fewer behind.
Yes, right. Yeah, so maybe a few more have come in. Maybe there's some of those military ballots. We'll dig into that in a moment. It hadn't updated since before I came into the studio just a short time ago. So that's Georgia. Let's just put a pin in that one as well. Nevada, where the lead for Joe Biden doubled in the last 24 hours, they appear to have been no more reporting there for the day, so we'll put a pin in Nevada until tomorrow morning as well. And then the only other the single biggest set of numbers that we're expecting in the next few hours is from Arizona. Arizona, and specifically from Phoenix and Maricopa County. There are tens of thousands of votes we think will come in. Australian Eastern Daylight Time may be about 3 o'clock, although we've been learning not to set our watches to these things, but sometime in the mid-afternoon. That, while we have Arizona sitting in Joe Biden's column at the moment and have allocated those 11 votes to Joe Biden, those votes that come in today might really clarify. Donald Trump there was an update this morning, and Donald Trump didn't do as well as he perhaps needed to overcome this deficit in votes. Perhaps with another hit, we'll get a clearer idea of whether Donald Trump is able to at all. For the other networks that have been more cautious than the Associated Press and Fox about calling that, if everyone else were to call it as well this afternoon, while it wouldn't change the number of Electoral College votes we've allocated at the ABC, it would certainly clarify some of the paths to victory and really narrow our focus quite a bit more. So really, it's just Pennsylvania and Arizona that we're watching this afternoon. I think when unlikely, things can always change. Things, maybe decision desks will decide they have seen enough, or they've worked out where the votes are. They don't need more count necessarily. They just need to know where the votes have come from.
Yeah, just for our viewers who aren't aware of all the electoral setup, what is a decision desk?
Yeah, so that's worth reinforcing, because elections in the United States work very differently to the way we're used to them in Australia. Each of these states is running its own race under its own rules with its own electoral officials, and there are county boards of directors that are reporting up to the secretaries of states. And because of that, there's no single electoral commission federally that reports the figures. That data comes in through media organisations that collect it, and then media organisations, and there are a series of big ones that have so-called decision desks, where they have data analysts, political scientists, and they are analysing all of the figures that come in and calling races, making determinations on who has won in each state. And for the most part, they do tend to agree. There have been a few differences this time, but that is the way that these electoral college votes are being allocated by media organisations. The alternative is we wait for every single county result to be certified, every single state then to be certified, and that to be transmitted to the state legislature, and then we could, but that would be a very long time, and in most cases you're able to call the result, you're able to see clearly what the result will be from the returns on the night.
Casey, what about Georgia and the recount that people have been talking about there?
It certainly will, I don't see this margin getting outside of the 0.5% where a recount is possible, which means either campaign can request a recount. The Secretary of State there has already said that would be likely. You would, presume if Donald Trump is behind, he will request a recount. If somehow he gets ahead of Joe Biden, well, Joe Biden would request a recount. So I think we just assume for the moment that will happen.
Can you just explain what the threshold is for a recount? Is it, if there's an automatic, or if you have to make a determination?
It varies from state to state, and that's the tricky thing here. In Georgia, it's not automatic. It's a 0.5% threshold in which campaigns can ask for it. They need to have some reasons, but it doesn't sound like they need to be particularly strong reasons. They can basically get that recount. In other states, in some states like Pennsylvania, there's an automatic recount at a 0.5% threshold. In states like Wisconsin, candidates can request a threshold at less than 1%. There's a threshold that's very small in Michigan. It just varies, completely from state to state. And that means, each of these races can play out and have dynamics in very different ways, and different sorts of matters can be taken through the courts, as we're seeing in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in Nevada, where all these sorts of court cases have been filed largely or entirely by the Trump campaign.
All right, hugely detailed. Lots more work ahead for you, Casey Briggs, but we'll leave you there for now. Thank you. Now let's go to our correspondent Catherine Diss in Wilmington, Delaware, outside the Joe Biden headquarters. Catherine, we have been expecting to hear from Joe Biden by now. Do you have any idea whether or not he will be stepping up?
Yeah, look, Miriam, we have been expecting him for about 20 minutes now, but he hasn't yet taken to the stage, and we're just seeing some reporting that he may not speak until there is some sort of definitive result. But we had been told that despite that he would be making some remarks tonight, and there would be fireworks, there would be confetti, but he might not necessarily declare victory. But tonight could well be the party. So that's why we all rushed down here from Philadelphia to make sure that we listen to those remarks. But we haven't yet seen him take to the stage, although we're hearing from the secret security staff on the ground here that they may well be packing up and going tomorrow. So that sort of gives us a bit of an indication that he is more likely to speak than not. But at this point in time, we don't know whether he's going to actually declare victory or just, we're being told, declare victory for democracy itself.
Right. Yeah, it looks a bit lonely there for you, Catherine, to be having a party. But give us an insight. Give us an insight into how much security there has been there, taking into account that Joe Biden, could well be president-elect.
Yeah, look, this area has been set up for a number of days now. I think the better part of a week, Joe, and it's relatively difficult to get inside. We have to be fully accredited, and the whole perimeter is staffed with security members, and you have to be properly screened and all those sorts of things. So there are security officials on the ground here, and in terms of his house, though, we heard earlier that they're also making sure that there is some security detail being sent to his home, which is in Wilmington, where we are, sort of preparing for any sort of threats against him or threats to his safety. So there's definitely a large number of security officials on the ground here. There are Secret Service officials, and it's been incredibly difficult to enter this arena that, as you said, looks incredibly lonely, because it is due to coronavirus. They have been taking things very seriously, the Democratic camp. They have only been holding or have been restricting their in-person events, and mostly been holding them as drive-through rallies where people rock up in their cars and honk their horns instead of cheer. We saw that happen on election night. So that was, 2 or 3 nights ago? I can't remember, Joe. It's all a bit of a blur. But we were told that that was the party he was having, and that we were expecting some cars here, but at the moment we haven't yet seen that. But we did see people sort of bringing in fireworks and confetti.
Right. Yeah, Catherine, I just want to clarify something you said a bit earlier. You said I think you said the security staff, you said security staff were kind of packing up and going home, and that was an indication that there might not be something tonight. I just want to clarify what that was.
Oh, no, sorry. What I mean is we got a bit of a heads up from the people here that they had been told that they may be from tomorrow packing up and going home, because
right.
As you can imagine, renting a space like that behind us is incredibly expensive. So if there isn't any sort of definitive result, and if there was to be a victory party and they had to wait a number more days for that to happen, they probably can't afford to keep renting the space. So that was just some of what we heard from people here, talking to people at the gate, having a chat to people as to what they had, what sort of feeling they were getting for what might be happening here tonight. But yeah, like I said, we're not sure if it's going to be an official victory speech or more just remarks to the nation as it gets closer to him potentially being able to declare what we think will be a victory here.
And Catherine, we've been speaking to you for the last couple of days from the streets of Philadelphia. What's it been like to be there on the streets in amongst those crowds with supporters of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden on kind of either side of you?
Look, I think it just paints a picture of America right now, Joe. It sums it up on one street, and both sides are just as passionate as each other, and I think it just proves the point that if anyone thought that this would be a landslide victory to Joe Biden, that they were wrong. That we shouldn't have been looking at the polls, because we should have been listening to the people that we've been speaking to on the ground here for months now, that this country is deeply divided. It's fractured right down the middle, and that's exactly what we saw play out on the streets of Philadelphia, even within a very deep democratic pocket, which is Philadelphia. In terms of, from a safety perspective, it most certainly didn't feel at all as though it was ever unsafe. The people on the Joe Biden camp were very jubilant. They were dancing in the street. It had more of a feel of a block party than anything else. And on the other side, they were chanting and saying their own passionate messages, but at no point did it feel like it would get to the point where tensions boiled over and become violent. But yeah, like I said, it just really summed up how the nation's feeling right now.
And Catherine, a stark contrast as well when we consider that Joe Biden is obviously playing it very safe with not being preemptive in anything that he announces or any statements that he's made. And we contrast that to Donald Trump, of course, who's been making numerous statements and on Twitter again talking about how he sees this election being wrongful, that, he's presuming as well also that there's irregularities in the way the vote's been conducted. So we're seeing quite a stark contrast between how Joe Biden is conducting the way that this plays out now.
Absolutely, Miriam, and that's why I think that we won't see him declare a victory unless it is definitive, because he has run a campaign on being everything that Donald Trump is not. So I think that we're going to continue to see him play that playbook, so to speak, because if he was to come out and declare a victory tonight without having, Pennsylvania declared within his camp, that would just make him as bad as Donald Trump. And that's exactly what he's campaigned on not being. So I think we'll continue to see that cautious approach. We're going to continue to see him being confident and optimistic that he and Kamala Harris will secure the White House. But like he has said over the last couple of days, all votes must be counted, and he is patiently waiting to be able to declare what we think will be a victory.
All right, we'll be waiting and seeing. And we have you there ready to go, Catherine Diss, our North America correspondent there at Wilmington in Delaware.
OK, let's now go to Politico reporter Maya King, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Maya, g'day. So we're doing this broadcast at the moment anticipating this Joe Biden announcement. Is the whole of America waiting for this announcement as well?
Absolutely. I mean, we're entering now the third day of this election, and this is something that a lot of Americans are not used to. Most times our elections are called on Tuesday, and that's exactly when we know the answer. And so the longer that we wait, the more tense things feel. And Americans are really just ready to now understand exactly who will be leading the country for the next 4 years.
And does 99% of the country accept that it's Joe Biden who's going to be doing that, or is there some people saying that Donald Trump still clearly has a chance?
Well, the president does still have a very narrow path to victory. He would have to win the rest of the remaining votes in Pennsylvania, secure the win in North Carolina, make up a difference in Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. And I mean, it's possible, but it's a really, really thin margin. And so as he continues to say that, there's instances of voter fraud that have not been backed up, or, we know that last night he made a speech trying again to preemptively declare victory for himself where there was none. His supporters listen to him, then they hear that and are prepared to, follow as he leads and discount any efforts of the Biden campaign to also declare victory. And so it's just another reminder of really how divided and how tense things feel right now as we enter the final stretch of this campaign.
And of course, we have had those avenues of legal cases being pursued there by the Trump camp, and in particular in Pennsylvania, we've seen that observers were stepping in there to scrutinise the counting. Is that adding to the sense that this election, which hangs on a knife edge in those key seats, is further inflaming a sense of division there across the United States?
I believe it is in some ways, but the issue with the legal proceedings that are being attempted here is that they don't quite have a basis yet that people can understand. So a lot of people have tried to make these allusions to the 2000 election here in the United States, which was indeed decided via the Supreme Court. The Trump campaign is trying to figure out a way to replicate that and find a scenario in which they can pursue litigation that makes it to the Republican-held Supreme Court to secure again a second term for President Trump. But right now, there simply is not a scenario in which that really is possible or able to be pursued. And in the areas where the Trump campaign has filed litigation, a lot of lower courts have already shot it down and said, you know, counting ballots is a key part of the election process. It's integral to our democracy, and trying to interfere with that via the courts is just not a strong enough case to make.
And there's been some really incendiary language used by people like Donald Trump Jr. But have you been heartened by the fact that has been very limited unrest and violent incidents so far?
I am. I think once we have a final answer as to who the next president will be, that will be really the critical moment for this country in figuring out whether this erupts into anything further. But I think for now, the onus is really on Republican officials to continue to call for a fair count and a complete count of votes. The president has tried to stoke tensions already by, again, as I said, preemptively declaring victory. But what's really important right now is for his allies and members of his party to actually rebuff and say, you know, what has to happen now is a fair count, and whoever wins, wins, and whoever loses, loses.
Maya, we've been casting ahead here on the basis that Joe Biden has been leading those key states. We're seeing incremental gains, although not so much in Arizona most recently. And looking ahead to a situation where, should he become president of the United States, he's positioning himself as a unifier. But we are seeing, of course, obviously, that the United States has been more increasingly divided over the term of Donald Trump's presidency. How do you see Joe Biden being able to help to forge those connections across communities that have been up against each other?
Well, the former vice president's work is certainly cut out for him. It's true in trying to figure out, you know, how to unify this country. But one thing that I will add here for context is, you know, the fact is that that Joe Biden is actually leading the popular vote by about 4 million votes. And so we know that really a large majority of Americans, while it's not exactly reflected in the Electoral College, do support Joe Biden's candidacy. And ultimately, if we do see the polls continue on the track that they are, his presidency. Now, you know, what will really be critical and crucial here is over the next few months, especially in the remaining 2 months of Donald Trump's presidency, figuring out a way to keep any political violence to a minimum while also trying to pass meaningful policies that matter to a broad swath of Americans. And chief among those, of course, would be a stimulus bill to try to bring some economic relief to people, because that's one of the most important issues facing Americans across political ideologies at this stage.
Maya, you mentioned there the popular vote that Joe Biden is leading pretty comprehensively at the moment. But the reality is the president is who becomes president of the US is based on the Electoral College vote, and some people, some Democrat supporters have quoted the popular vote from the 2016 election to say that Donald Trump was never the legitimate president because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Can you understand how Republicans see that as a cheap shot, taking into account Democrat criticisms of Republicans who say that that the popular vote isn't the way to assess the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's another partisan argument, I believe, but I think it's just something to keep in mind that a larger swath of Americans indeed have supported Democratic candidates for 7 of the past 8 elections. However, Republicans historically defend the Electoral College and say, this is the system that we have in place, and that it's reflective, of the kind of democracy that we've chosen to pursue. Democrats have long tried to abolish the Electoral College, just letting the popular vote decide elections. But again, given the fact that we have a divided, populace, but also a two-system legislature, there's never really been any inroads there to try to make that a reality. But I do understand, where Republicans also are pushing back on that.
Yeah. And attention now turning to Joe Biden as president. What difference can we see in terms of United States, both domestically and internationally, if Joe Biden does win this vote?
Well, I think most immediately the biggest difference we'll see is the handling of the coronavirus. Already I'm seeing conversations online from people who are kind of, especially on the Democratic side, looking forward to, a little bit more control over the virus. It's really ravaging the country at this point. There aren't a lot of guardrails in place to try to keep people protected. We don't have a national mask mandate. There aren't a lot of therapeutic options available. And even guidance from public health officials has been called into question by this Republican White House. And so that's really the biggest thing that we're looking forward to, I think, as a nation, and for Joe Biden supporters in particular, is some kind of a handle on the virus to keep cases down and figure out a way to move forward.
Yeah. OK, Maya King, thanks so much for talking to us from Washington.
Thanks for having me.
OK, so
Yes.
with this broadcast today, a big focus has been the Joe Biden address. It was supposed to happen about 40 minutes ago. There has been no movement. We've got our correspondent Catherine Diss there in Delaware.
Yes, Wilmington.
In Wilmington, Delaware, standing by to bring that to us. So it's been up in the air, but just in the last few minutes we've heard
Joe Biden will be speaking.
we haven't got a time on that.
Yes.
But apparently it will be
But it's been
happening.
confirmed that he will be speaking.
And apparently they've got like confetti and fireworks there ready to go, but presumably that's not going to be let off if there is no definitive announcement about whether he has achieved enough electoral college votes or not. And that definitive announcement would come from one of the chief networks there, the media networks in the US, and that still has not happened. So yeah, we're not expecting it will be a declaration, there'll be a big party, but we are expecting something from Joe Biden in the coming hours.
All right. Well, while we wait, there will be a recount in Georgia, which could come down to a few thousand votes. Right now, Joe Biden is leading by just over 4,000 votes. Political reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Greg Bluestein, says a recount might not make much of a difference.
The race is very, very close. Joe Biden has roughly a 2,000 vote lead over President Trump in Georgia. And to put that into context, no Democrat has won Georgia in the race for the White House since 1992. So this would be a seismic political shift in Georgia, which is a solidly Republican state. So overnight when that happened around 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time over here, it was cataclysmic. There was a social media explosion among Democrats when it happened. And I think, people in my line of work and our line of work had to remind people, okay, Biden's ahead. That doesn't mean he'll stay ahead. There's still thousands of ballots to be counted in Georgia. It was a lawsuit alleging misconduct from an election staffer down in the coastal city of Savannah involving absentee ballots that apparently they were trying to claim came in after a Tuesday 7 p.m. deadline. A judge dismissed it after hearing about an hour's worth of arguments and testimony from elections officials saying that the Republican claims were out of line. And I think this is indicative of what the Trump campaign and Republicans are doing around the nation, where they're trying to halt the counting of ballots. They're trying to question the integrity of the vote to lay the groundwork for a public relations campaign if Trump does end up losing this contest. There's reports among the boarded up shops and businesses that closed down and all these precautions were taken, but thankfully, just as in past elections, at least past the recent elections, there was no uproar, there was no protest or riots in the street. Everything, all the demonstrations were peaceful. Georgia, as I mentioned, has usually been one of those states that was so safely Republican that right after the polls closed, the networks could call the state for Georgia. So it's one of those states where the polls close at 7:01 p.m., Republican candidate XYZ wins Georgia. But as the state becomes more competitive, and that's partly because of Trump, but that's partly because of Democrats embracing broader-based issues in Georgia. They're talking about health care, expanding the Affordable Care Act. They're talking about income equality. They're talking about issues that they feel like resonates with a broader base of population. They're starting to win voters in the populous suburbs of Atlanta. And that's been the deciding difference for Democrats, really, in Georgia. Long-held Republican counties ringing the city of Atlanta have suddenly gone from red to blue. And that's been really the reason why Democrats are so close here in Georgia right now.
Well, Simon Jackman is the chief executive of the United States Studies Centre and says he doesn't expect Republicans to block a transition of power to Joe Biden if the Democrats win.
Let's just assume for a moment that Biden is declared the winner. He is inaugurated as president on January 20. And I think at that point, America starts to move on. Trump, no doubt, holds a great sway over the Republican Party, and indeed 70 million Americans did vote for him. But Democrats and the country, by and large, got used to the words President Trump, despite Donald Trump not winning the popular vote in 2016, despite Donald Trump's claim to victory resting on a 77,000 vote margin in 3 states. Executive authority was recognized as having appropriately vested in Donald J. Trump. And I think the same will be true for Joe Biden once we get through this extraordinarily difficult period of deciding who has won the election and on the way through to the transition. Once Biden is in the White House, once he is clearly in command of the executive branch of the United States government, I think those claims of illegitimacy will still carry great political sway among the Republican base in particular, and will pose problems for Joe Biden trying to prosecute an agenda through Congress. But as a practical matter of governing, I don't think that will be a huge insurmountable barrier. So much depends on Trump remaining a larger-than-life media presence and through that route commanding great hold over the hearts and minds of the Republican base. The question, I think it's a live question, is how does that work when you take away what we call the bully pulpit of the American presidency? What is Trump's hold on that base like when the attention we vest in his tweets, because he is the US president versus a US president no more? I think that's the question. Does he have as much airtime on Fox and those other outlets as an ex-president than as a president? And moreover, what do the Republican political leaders in the Senate in particular do with this moment?
Simon Jackman there. Now, we have a time. We've been telling you this morning that we're really keen on bringing you this Joe Biden announcement. It was due about 50 minutes ago. Now we're hearing he will be speaking in about an hour and 10 minutes' time. So that's 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. We'll bring you that live here on the ABC News channel. Protests and counter-protests are being held outside voting centres in several states in the US. Journalist Denise Clay is in Philadelphia, in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. She says demonstrations today have been peaceful.
Philadelphia has protests that are a little bit different than everybody else's. So what we've been seeing in front of the convention center, where the vote is being counted in Pennsylvania, is basically a dance party. Vote counting activists are there, and they have a DJ, and there's line dancing, and the occasional chant of "count the vote," which is being answered by Trump voters who are saying stop the steal. So right now it's kind of a festive atmosphere. But last night, 2 men were arrested when they came to Philadelphia from Virginia, armed, with the intention of taking over the convention center where the vote is being counted. So, it's gotten a little off the rails at times today, but for the most part, it's been, pretty just people expressing their First Amendment right. You have a lot of people who because of our poverty level, also have health challenges like diabetes and heart disease. So the prospect of them losing their health care due to a dismissal of the Affordable Care Act really stood out to them. You also this is also a traditionally Democratic stronghold, a union town, and unions tend to vote Democratic. So that's another reason why folks were waiting to see what the numbers were coming out of Philadelphia in terms of this election. Also, how Pennsylvania usually shakes out, and I think that James Carville, who was President Bill Clinton's campaign manager, said it best. You have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between. And Philadelphia and the five suburban counties surrounding it is where most of the state's population is. And usually how Philadelphia and Pittsburgh go, so goes the state. So, like I said, in 2016, that didn't quite happen because you had enough of the folks in the more red areas of Pennsylvania, what we call the Republican T, that really, really exerted themselves. But what's different about this year is that Joe Biden, who is from that section of the state, from Scranton, was able to do better in those red counties than Hillary Clinton did, which is why he's now ahead.
Turning to other news now, Victorians will learn tomorrow what coronavirus restrictions will be relaxed next week and what further steps can be taken in the coming months. The state's recorded no new COVID cases or deaths for the 8th consecutive day, bringing Melbourne's 14-day case average down to 0.9. There are now just 8 active cases in Victoria and 2 cases in Melbourne with an unknown source. Health Minister Martin Foley wouldn't confirm reports. They may be changing rules around wearing masks.
I think all Victorians know that the efforts they've made in driving down the infection rates have played a part in keeping us open, and masks have played a role in that. And I think you need look no further than the community of Shepparton, where they had unknown for the best part of 2 weeks the virus circulating in their community, but kept it to 3 people with infections. You talk to that community and their health service and they will tell you the important role that masks have played. We'll have more to say about the easing of restrictions tomorrow, but I think Victorians can work on the basis that masks will be with us for as long as they need to be.
And New South Wales has recorded 5 new coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours, and 24 hours to 8 last night. 1 of those cases was locally acquired, so the other 4 are all overseas travellers now in hotel quarantine. The 1 local case is a household contact of a confirmed case in the Moss Vale cluster in the state's Southern Highlands.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison has announced a new agreement with the Tasmanian government to process overseas arrivals. The federal government is providing around $50 million to pay for border security officials at Hobart Airport. It's set to become the hub for a trans-Tasman bubble planned to launch next January, with 3 direct flights operating weekly between Hobart and Auckland. Australians are still not allowed to travel to New Zealand.
Right now, Kiwis can fly to Australia in those states that have those arrangements, and that will be true here in Tasmania. What other countries do in enabling Australians to travel to other places is a matter for them, and this isn't a reciprocal arrangement.
And now with sport in perfectly coordinated blue, here is Louise Ransom.